This episode of Diary of a Wrestling Fan is dedicated to the memory of the wild-eyed Southern boy, Tracy Smothers. It is now time for Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. And now, here he is, the man who the ladies refer to as a pretty decent 7 out of 10, Bill Chase! Thank you, Mr. Podcast Announcer, and welcome once again to another episode of Diary of a Wrestling Fan, the podcast that chronicles my 33 amazing years of being a fan of the wonder that is professional wrestling. Thank you for listening on Anchor, on Spotify, wherever podcasts are streamed. Hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, wherever you got to hit to keep following this podcast, wherever you may be listening. If you're listening on YouTube, hit that subscribe button right now. Well, this week, we have a dandy for you. WCW Halloween Havoc 1997, only fitting because of the time of year it is. And plus the fact that NXT paid homage to Halloween Havoc. Had I known they were going to do Spin the Wheel, Make the Deal, I might have saved the Jake Roberts Sting episode that I did not long ago. In the archives, by the way. And I would have saved that for today. But, hey, I still have Halloween Havoc 97. Maybe one of the best shows WCW put on in this era. And, of course, who can forget the big main event? Age in the Cage, brother. We'll get to that in a second. But before that, I want to give a quick plug, of course, to Pro Wrestling Ontario. Easy for me to say. Pro Wrestling Ontario. Follow us on Twitter, on Instagram. You can give us a like on Facebook. Subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're actually listening to this podcast on YouTube, scroll over the right side of the video screen. There's a link. There it is right there. Yes, after the video's over, click on it, hit subscribe, watch our videos. We got complete shows. We got matches. We got the backstage shenanigans of Foundation. In our complete shows, we have both Iron Cup tournaments. And you will not regret checking out Pro Wrestling Ontario. All right, on with the show. WCW Halloween Havoc 1997. Wow, I have gone over 1997 and this whole era a few times on this podcast. Again, check stuff out in the archives. Not long before this show took place, actually, the SummerSlam 97 happened. And that's when Bret Hart became the champion for the 5th time. And that's about as good as it would get for him from there on going forward. Either way, it was a great time to be a wrestling fan in late 1997. I can't stress that enough. But at this time, me personally, I'm starting high school. Okay, it's even though I was still with a lot of people I went to middle school with. Let's keep in mind, I didn't like a lot of the people I went to middle school with. I literally had a group of 3 friends. There was John. I hadn't met Jeff yet. I would meet Jeff in grade 9. There was John, my good friend John Forjak. Hadn't even met Tom. Like I said, I wouldn't meet Tom till much later, who I mentioned him on the podcast before. I had John. I had Adam Pryor, who we didn't always get along sometimes, but all in all, he actually turned out to be a really decent guy. But yeah, they're my wrestling buddies. Had a couple others, but didn't have a lot of friends. I had my friend Eddie, who I was close with at that point too. But he wasn't a huge wrestling fan. He was more of a casual viewer, but he still watched here and there. So I had those guys, I guess. But here was the problem: I had literally no classes with any of them, which is weird because John and I both had learning difficulties, and you figure we would be in some of the same classes, but it was that whole thing where he had the classes in the first semester that I would have in the second kind of deal. You know what I mean? And so we were never in each other's class, which, that was hard. That was really hard. And speaking of high school, I actually want to give a shout out to my old drama teacher, Mr. Michaela, who I recently connected with on Facebook. So, yeah. But anyway, what really was difficult about the whole thing was that, I loved wrestling so much, and the other guys in my classes who liked it, they were assholes. These were the guys who would pick on me. They continued the tradition from middle school. I had a whole new group of people who'd pick on me. Yay. Sometimes, again, it was like that we would bond over wrestling, but other times it's just like they would just be assholes. So, as October hits now, keep in mind, this is the time when the strike, the school strike, took place that shut schools down in Ontario for 2 weeks. High schools down in Ontario. It was like another vacation. But in the back of my mind, this is the way I always think, as much as I was loving the time off, I didn't want to lose my summer because they were talking about that being a possibility. I'm like, no. If anybody who knows me knows I love the summer season. Okay, even this year with the pandemic, I still tried to make the most of it. And I did. I got to go to Shirkston for a whole weekend. I got to do most of the stuff I normally do. So, with some restrictions, obviously, but either way, it could have been worse. But I digress. So, anyway, I was stressing out at the point of school. I wasn't doing too well in classes already at the start of the year. So, I figured, okay, maybe the 2 week break will do me good. We didn't know it was a 2 week break. We figured, come what may, you know what I mean? So, we find out that week that the schools are going on strike the weekend just before Halloween Havoc. And I'm thinking, yes, I can stay up and watch Halloween Havoc and not have to go to bed right after it's over because my parents let me stay up late. When I didn't have school, they do the same thing with my sister right now, who is actually, oddly enough, in grade 9 right now. She's the age right now that I was at when Halloween Havoc 97 took place. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this. And I'll be honest with you, I was over the Hogan Piper feud. At the age of 14, I loved the NWO. The NWO, they were my guys. I loved them. Now, I didn't like a lot of heels until Raven came along. And I mentioned that in my ECW podcast. Again, check that out in the archives. But the thing was that I was, at this point, a little more interested in another feud involving an NWO member and a WCW member, and that was one of the matches that were at the forefront of this show, DDP and the Macho Man. Now, Macho, to me, when I was watching him these last 3 years he'd been with WCW, even as a kid, I remember his final days in the WWF and thinking, why is he not wrestling? I mean, he was, but he was mostly doing commentary and whatnot. Because fans still loved him, it was clear. Every time he walked out through the curtain, they'd go nuts for him. Maybe he wasn't going to be at the level, like I'll say, for argument's sake, if he stayed in the WWF, maybe he wasn't going to be at the level of a star that he was in the 80s, granted, but he still could have done a lot more. He was still could have been a valuable part of that roster had they just let him. In the last 3 years, I'd seen something in him. I mean, he had his injury issues, whatever, but he still had a spark there. He still carried himself like a star. That's a big factor. And even at 14 years old, I could see Macho Man as a superstar in my eyes. DDP, because of the Macho Man, I thought DDP sucked. No, I'm not saying that he sucked in the sense he couldn't work or anything like that, because, well, he could, obviously. But, my point is that just DDP never did anything for me. He was just another bad guy on the roster for so many years, and I just didn't care for it. I actually thought he was annoying. But I was still going for Macho Man in this view, but I perceived DDP as a real threat at this point. He was a guy that didn't make me want to change the channel anymore. So it just goes to show you what Macho Man did for this guy. This was the feud that was really taking center stage. Now, also, at least for me, also you had stuff going on with Larry Zbyszko. That stuff was interesting. But I never liked Larry Zbyszko at that time. So I was hoping the NWO would bitch slap him one of these days because I just didn't like him. Because I remember him with the Dangerous Alliance back then. I'm like, I don't like Larry Zbyszko. But the NWO feud with WCW was still at its height. Sting was calling out Hope. Well, no, he wasn't really calling him out because he wasn't saying anything. But Sting was communicating, there we go, non-verbally that he wanted Hogan in the ring. And of course, even the most casual fan knew that was happening at Starrcade. I mean, the build was still exciting. So the weekend of Halloween Havoc, I remember that same weekend. I remember the Hamilton Tire Cats were having a shitty season. I mean, they were awful. They finished 2-16 that year. And my grandmother and I were still season ticket holders. We watched them play the Edmonton Eskimos. It was actually the last game of the year. We're thinking, okay, well, we had a shitty year, but why don't we end it on a positive note? Send the fans that have been coming to these games, watching them lose time after time, watching them win one home game all year and two games period all year. Let's send them home happy. Let's send them, with something. Because a lot of fans do think that way. We want to just be happy with what we've seen. The season sucked. Your win over the Eskimos, again, a team that was just in the Grey Cup in that very stadium the year before. Let's just send them packing. Let's send them with, let's play spoilers. Send them with no momentum going into the playoffs. Now, Edmonton already clinched their tickets, so they weren't using a lot of their starters, although they were, but not the whole game. And we were putting up a fight, but I remember at halftime what I usually did was I would go over to the under section of the stadium and visit my cousins because they were all there with usually my uncle. So I went to see them, and sometimes my Aunt Teresa would be there too. But I would go there, I'd visit them, and I remember my cousin Wayne says to me, "Hey, you gonna watch Halloween Havoc?" I said, "Yeah, of course." I said, Macho Man and DDP. He's like, "Yeah, Madness is so cool," like referring to Macho Madness. So he's like, "What about the Hogan Piper match?" I'm like, well, I mean, we've seen him fight many times. It's not for the title even. And I remember what else was he mentioning too? Oh, he was mentioning the Ric Flair Kurt Hennig match that was coming out. And they liked the NWO too, but they were huge on Hogan, I remember. I mean, they liked Hogan, but not near as much. So I remember I was being all psyched for Halloween Havoc, talking to them. And then, who was it? I think it was my cousin Jamie was there, and he's just like, "Oh, WWE's stupid sometimes anyway," which he did think. But he liked it. He still watched. He's just like, who wants to see Hogan and Piper again? It's like living in the 80s. He had a point. But still, I mean, and spoiler, the show drew a gigantic buy rate at the time. So clearly people still wanted to see it, I guess. Who am I to argue? So the Ticats lost. Little did I know that the duo, the quarterback receiver duo of the Eskimos, Danny McManus and Darren Flutie, who sent us packing with one more humiliating loss that season, would be the guys that would turn the Ticats around the very next year. And 2 years later, win the Grey Cup. So there you go. How's that for a little twist for you? So anyway, that weekend, like I said, I knew I was going to be off school Monday, so I was looking forward to it. I'm thinking, oh man, I'll be out during Halloween. That's so cool, right? So the big show comes. No, not the big show, but the big Halloween Havoc show. Halloween Havoc always felt like a big deal. It was the way WCW presented it. I have to give them that. They always presented it as a big deal. And so I'm ready for the show. And I remember this was the time where Raven was being shown a lot in the crowd. I always got excited seeing him on screen, but at the same time, I was just sick of him sitting in the crowd the whole time. Like, do something, Raven. Like he did here and there, but I don't know. Like, it just, as a fan, I'm impatient because I loved Raven and got so excited when he jumped to WWE because I could see him every week now. So anyway, the opening match was Yuji Nagata versus Ultimo Dragon. Now, I loved Ultimo Dragon. At this point, I thought he was just unbelievable, off the charts. WCW, I will give credit for, what's the word? Captivating my interests in cruiserweights, which I've always, like, it's nothing like I always like the big guys and the main event guys. No, it's just, again, cruiserweights, WCW helped bring them to the forefront. In North America is what I mean. Well, maybe I shouldn't say North America, because Mexico is a part of North America, but the US mainly, and in Canada too. So anyway, Yuji Nagata, Ultimo Dragon. Now, this whole story was Ultimo and Sonny Ono, who was managing Nagata at the time, had a big falling out. And this was kind of like he's using Nagata to make Dragon pay. So I was really into this match. watching at the time. I remember my dad, he was coming up and down the stairs because him and my mom would usually watch TV in my room and I watched the pay-per-view if they didn't go see a movie, that is. Came downstairs. This did not interest him at all. My dad was falling out with wrestling at this point. And this was the show that he had told me something that will lead into next week's episode. Now, I know I should save it for the end, but this happened during the show because I'm going to talk about the something that happened on Raw the next night, not even Nitro, on Raw the next night. And he told me that Bret Hart might be going to WCW. I guess it leaked in the dirt sheets at the time. Dad read that article in the Toronto Sun that used dirt sheet rumors and whatnot to make some reports. And yeah, I was like, no. He's like, well, it's just a rumor. Even when he liked to tease me and wind me up about stuff, he would. At least I think he calmed me down on that one. He knew how much I love Bret Hart. So it's just a rumor, but I don't know. I read that he might go to WCW. I'm like, he's still. And here's what I said, but he's still the champion. Yep. So anyway, during this match, he said, and then he went back upstairs. So I was like, again, I love Dragon. I didn't know a lot about Nagata at that point, but I knew he was good, clearly. So I remember because I hated Sonny Ono because he was a great heel. I thought Sonny was a great heel. Just something about his smug smile and the originator of the selfie. It was just so obnoxious. I just didn't like the guy. And made Ultimo tap out. And I was disappointed. I'm like, damn it, because I said I wanted to see maybe Sonny Ono get his ass kicked. Didn't happen, but it was still a lot of fun. So I was rating the show. WCW had me really excited leading up to Hogan and Sting. At the time, Nitro was churning out some great television at this point still. In hindsight, when you watch it now, there's some stuff that didn't age well, but that's wrestling in general. That's anything in general. That's any aspect of entertainment. Some stuff just doesn't age well. But at the time, it was great. In this match, spoiler, still aged well. Now, next up, we had another match. Gato. Yeah, that's right. A lot of you know him for a different reason now. Against Chris Jericho. Jericho here was still a babyface. He would turn heel shortly after this, a couple months later. But Jericho still had a lot of fire as a babyface. Boy, did he ever. Watching this match again, I'm thinking, wow. And I guess they just didn't feel that the reaction was what they wanted. Because, to be fair, sometimes the crowd would react to stuff Jericho does. But I think with the way wrestling was going, perhaps, maybe fans just felt that he didn't fit the mold of that, a lot of personalities that were happening in wrestling right now. And that just simply being in the cruiserweight division wouldn't be enough. So obviously we know what happened. Spoiler, Jericho turned heel and had an amazing 1998. Anyway, Jericho as a wrestler still as good as he ever was. There was a scary spot in this match, however. Jericho is literally standing on the top rope with Gato, goes for Hurricane Rana, and lands on his neck. Or, at the very least, that's how it looked. He narrowly avoided a neck injury. Drew some blood from his face, yes, but he tucked his head at literally the last tenth of a second to avoid breaking his neck. Keep in mind, we are only not close to 3 months removed from Stone Cold Steve Austin's injury when he took that tombstone from Owen Hart at SummerSlam. In the archives, by the way. So Jericho, I thought he did. I literally thought he landed on his neck. And then I saw his face afterwards. I'm like, oh, okay. Thank God. Even I knew that looked terrifying. Right away, I thought Austin. Austin. Thankfully, Jericho was okay. The match continued, and the match was fun. It was a nice, just nice brawl between these two. Nice brawl that had some spots. Just a good back and forth competitive match. Brawl might be the wrong word, but it's just very competitive and, aggressive. Aggressive, I guess, is a better word. Because it still had, some of Jericho's, few of his high spots here and there. So anyway, Jericho wins the match. So he continues his. Jericho I thought, had momentum at this point until they started that losing streak thing with him. So I was happy that he was. I liked Jericho. I thought he was a lot of fun. So moving on. So the show showcases matches from cruiserweights for his first two matches. There's nothing wrong with that. So it was the norm for WCW. Oh, but a third cruiserweight match, actually for the title, was about to come. Yes, it's that match. And I was looking forward to this too because I loved Rey Mysterio. I was blown away from him. I hated Eddie as a character, but I loved watching him wrestle. I was solidly behind Rey. It was title versus mask. But Eddie had been such just a nasty heel. I thought there was a chance he could still win. So Rey versus Eddie. Eddie been going for the mask for a while now leading up to this, so it's a good story. Rey's telling the importance of winning that cruiserweight title. The fact that he's willing to put, again, when a luchador wrestler loses a mask, that is huge. They put their mask on the line, it is off the charts. It's even in Mexico, I'd say, it's more than putting your career on the line. Because that mask is your career. That's how a lot of Mexican fans see it. And I think that's just great storytelling. So this match, again, just unbelievable. I am glued to this. Even when my dad came downstairs again, I think it was just to get a pop from the fridge. Even he stood there for 5 minutes, 5 solid minutes, and he normally doesn't enjoy the cruiserweights whenever he was casually watching a pay-per-view with me. And he was watching this. He was watching this. Here you have two guys, masters of this style. The whole anger driving Eddie even to go for the mask before he could try to win the match. And you could just feel the emotion that these two are giving. And of course, I figure, okay, my dad goes upstairs again. He's back down 2 minutes later. Again, doesn't take a seat, thinks he's just going to get bored quick again. He came down just in time to see the ending. So Rey wins the match versus the Rana into a pin and wins the title. The arena goes nuts. I even jump out of my couch like, yes! Because Rey was always that kind of sympathetic character as well. He was fighting for the honor of his career. Not necessarily his career, but the honor. Sometimes that's more important in some ways. Again, especially with the whole mask deal in Mexico, it is more important than your career. It's the honor of the mask. And Eddie was the kind of disgusting heel that would want to humiliate Rey. Just because he doesn't care about anybody but himself, like a true heel. So anyway, even my dad said, oh, there you go. Even he was kind of going for Rey there. He goes back upstairs. So they do this whole thing, I remember, with Hogan. Then he threatens to wrestle. WCW threatens not to wrestle, sorry, if WCW can guarantee Sting won't be in the building. Oh, boy. We all know where this is going. Even I knew back then where it was going. I.e., honest to God, I thought to myself, there'll probably just be a couple fake Stings out there, or guys dressed like Sting that hate Hogan. So anyway, Next up, we had Never Mind That Shit. Here comes Mongo. That's right, our good pal, your boy, everybody's boy, Steve Mongo McMichael, taking on everybody's favorite nightclubber, Das Wunderkind Alex Wright. So anyway, now again, Mongo had personality, but even back then, and I didn't hate the Horsemen necessarily at this point. I didn't like the way they were feuding with the NWO, but I grew to appreciate what an elite group that, and I was around this point I started really learning about their history. But like, he never did it for me. I always thought Benoit was a fantastic wrestler to watch. I thought Flair, as much as I hated him, I was never bored by him. Arn, same thing. Like, so Mongo and Deborah had a big falling out. Deborah McMichael, his real life wife, later ex-wife. Return the credit cards was the whole angle. Well, okay. So anyway, she's out there while he's facing Alex Wright, and Goldberg gets involved. Wright wins. That's right. This was Goldberg's first feud, his first real feud. Goldberg was actually a heel at this point. Even at this point, though, he was already starting to get cheers because he was winning every week. Goldberg had only been on TV literally for a month at this point. So Goldberg obtains Mongo's Super Bowl ring, legit Super Bowl ring. And that was it. It was just, at that time, I thought Goldberg was intriguing, but I really wasn't a big fan yet. As time went on, much like it did for most fans of him, I grew to really like the guy a lot. I grew to really enjoy it, just watching him just obliterate people. So yeah, that was what it was. Next up, we had Disco Inferno versus Jacqueline. It's another time where my dad came back downstairs. He thought this was a joke. Me, did not care at all. I was on a high for those first three matches, especially that Eddie and Ray match. And we get this next. I did not care whatsoever. I didn't like Jacqueline. I didn't like Disco. But I've grown to appreciate both of a lot of things they've both done over the years. But at this point, no, just didn't care. I didn't really start getting into Disco until I started teaming with Alex Wright. So anyway, yeah, Jackie wins, which I thought was actually kind of cool. My dad was like, this is ridiculous. And goes back upstairs. So next up, we had Curt Hennig and Ric Flair. Now you think on paper, this will be off the charts. And I actually thought that too. I knew how great these two were as wrestlers. Even at my jaded young age, I knew. I think, oh, here we go. So I was excited because this feud. Hennig was given a spot in the Horsemen. Not just any spot, Arn's spot, the Enforcer spot. Then, of course, that infamous turn at War Games where he betrayed the Horsemen and joined the NWO. I mean, okay. They go on about how they killed the town, stuff like that. You know, I don't know. I wasn't there. But, I mean, they still held Fall Brawl there the next year. There were still people there. Lots of people. Good house, it looked like. So, maybe they hurt the town. I could buy that. But at the same time, though, again, in hindsight now, I can see now in hindsight why people shit on that now. I get it. As I get older, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that wasn't the best decision to make. When you look at that NWO team, They could have afforded to lose that match. Hogan wasn't there. Savage wasn't even in the match. And I mean, yeah, Nash was, but Nash was, even though he was a top level guy, not like he had to take the fall. Again, I'm just freestyling here. I mean, Bagwell, Six, and Conan had done jobs. It's not like they could have been beaten here. But I mean, I still dig the story here even years later with, again, Flair being pissed off, but it didn't lead to a final payoff, sadly. So at the time, we're thinking this is going to lead. I thought this was going to lead to Starrcade especially after seeing the finish. So here's another thing too. Hennig was carrying the cruiserweight title. I don't know the story behind this. I'm just assuming that something happened with the US title. He didn't really say. Maybe he just got lived in his hotel room. Who knows? I don't know. Probably just one of those type of situations. The title was back like 2 after, so it's not like it was lost completely. Or maybe it was. They had to make a new one. I don't know. I really don't feel like going through Bischoff's archive of podcasts to figure it out because I quite frankly don't like his podcast. There, I said it. Anyway, this was a fun match. I thought it's not as off the charts as their match they had on Raw in January '93, where Rick left the company, where Kurt ran him out of the company. But I was still right into it. I watched it again recently, and it was good. You really have a bad match with these two. So anyway, of course, Flair goes, kind of snaps, and uses the belt, uses the title belt, and it Kurt's in a tree of woe. Rick just jams it into his face with his foot. That's his qualification. And again, in the context of the story, it made sense. Rick was pissed. Kurt had stolen one of Rick's robes. He disrespected the Horsemen, disrespected WCW by betraying them. But here's my thought as a kid. Now, yeah, Rick is the babyface here, and rightfully so. As a fan, I simply thought, and I think I remember saying this to my cousins. Well, I did this. This is a story I forgot to tell at the Tiger game the night before. I said, well, Ric Flair has betrayed many people in his career, and I knew that then. So he got a taste of his own medicine. It's true. That's what I felt at the time. Rick got a taste of his own medicine. So fuck you, Ric Flair. No, just kidding. At the time, I was all for Kurt Hennig here because he's an WO guy. Yeah, WO. So next up after that, I think again, sadly we would not get the payoff we deserved with this. Next up, we have Scott Hall versus Lex Luger. Oh, I know what you're thinking. Larry Zbyszko is the guest referee. And of course, he has an issue with the NWO at this point, mainly Scott Hall and Eric Bischoff. So then, during this match, it's holding my attention. Now, my dad comes back downstairs. I just said to him, this time my dad sat down. I guess whatever movie him and my mom were watching was over. So he came back downstairs, sat with me, and he said, "Oh." He said, it's Razor. Well, he always called Hall Razor, regardless. And I said, you just missed Kurt Hennig and Ric Flair. He's like, oh, you should have called me. So my dad loved Mr. Perfect. My dad was a Mr. Perfect fan, big time. Especially after that match at SummerSlam with Bret Hart, '91. He was hooked on him, even though that would be his last match for a while. But my dad just loved him after that. So anyway, my dad comes downstairs, watches this match with Hall and Luger, and to be fair, it's, again, if you're expecting a 5-star classic here, then don't watch it. For the story it was telling, again, I thought it was fine. At that time, I was into it because why? I hated Larry Zbyszko. I was hoping during the match Scott Hall would slap him. And Zbyszko kept getting involved. And of course, usually my dad chirps me when I say, "Oh, that's not fair." Hey, what the hell? You know what I mean? Ever since I was a kid, since I was 4 or 5 years old, and my dad would say, "Well, he deserved it," but at the same time, though, At the same time, when Six got involved, and then Hall hit the razor's edge, and my dad, of course, how can you cheer for cheating? And Larry Zbyszko largely counted three. Now, Zbyszko was a fair ref most of the match. But then he asked to see the instant replay, and the match starts again. And I said, hey, there's no, even my dad went, yeah, there's no instant replay in wrestling. That's lame. I said, no, that's stupid. Then, of course, Six runs in for the disqualification. And that's it. Or at least I think it was a disqualification. It was announced. So, either way. It led up to the whole Zbyszko Bischoff issue, which I thought it was a well done angle. I still do. And of course, Zbyszko takes a bit of a beating from the parties involved, including Bischoff. And that was it. Like, good. Somebody actually watched the rest of the show with me from here on. The match I was waiting for, DDP and the Macho Man, and my dad right away. And again, even though my dad would tribute me for cheering for the NWO sometimes, and some of the heels I liked, or even I don't know, my dad, that's just what his style was, just his type of humor. He loved his guys still. Even when he wasn't watching wrestling much, he still loved his guys. Macho Man, chances are if he was in the WWE, if any guys in the WWE in the 80s, they were my dad's guys. Macho Man was my dad's guy. All the way. So Macho, DDP, have had a great feud all year. All year. DDP was the rebellious one going against the NWO. The former heel who just said, no, I hate you guys. And the Macho Man took it personally. They started a nice feud in the spring. It's been ongoing all year since. This, of course, is like last man standing type rules. They had the whole issue with Macho and Elizabeth. I thought Elizabeth made a very surprisingly decent heel at this point. You wouldn't think of it when you think of her in the 80s, but I thought she was effective in her role, especially here in the NWO era with Macho Man. Like, it was a wild brawl. You could, again, we're making you feel the hatred. It was like the emotion of the Eddie Ray match for different reasons. Again, the use of Kimberly and Elizabeth here, it was minuscule. It didn't take over the match, and it was like Macho Man. They say is a detail freak. So he put that spot in there at the right time when he knew it might be a dead spot. Not a dead spot, but just a spot where nothing's really happening. So, of course, we know we're going to get the fucky NWO finish. And that's, again, at that time, I thought that stuff was still okay. I wasn't really getting sick of that stuff until like months down the road. So, and I think I mentioned that, I think I touched on that briefly on the Goldberg Beats Hogan podcast in the archives. So anyway, a fake Sting comes out right away. My dad looks at me, he's like, that's Hogan. Yeah. And even the announcers pretty much suspected as such, I think. So, hits DB with the bat. DB's counted out. That's it. Macho wins. And it's weird because I remember my dad saying, Macho Man has to cheat to beat this guy? Yeah, well, keep in mind, my dad didn't watch WCW much. Even when he was still watching wrestling quite frequently, he never really got into WCW a lot. For some reason, my dad always loved Barry Windham. I don't know. But anyway, so I thought that was a great match. A lot of fun. I was right into it. Happy Macho Man won. Here we go, brother. Age in the cage, brother. You're promising, brother. It's going to be the greatest cage match of all time. And we're going to determine, Hogan, who the real icon is. Yeah, that was a lame Piper, I know. But anyway, in this match, again, it was like almost a Thunder Cage style, kind of steel cage. In the first 2 minutes, and I'm bored. I'm bored. And no, I'm not some skeptical smart mark here. I barely knew the inside of the business at this point at all. I was just bored. As a fan, I'm simply bored watching this. I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is, oh my God. This is like less than 5 minutes in. I'm sick of it. What does my dad do? He at this time he asked me. He said, "Do you mind if I check the football game?" I said, "No, go ahead." I still want to see who won. I still want to see how the match would end. So then they go outside the cage, which again, just even my dad pointed out, he was right. What's the point of the cage if they're just going to fight outside? Now, keep in mind, this is 3 weeks since the first Hell in a Cell match. 3 weeks. And if you're a diehard wrestling fan, I don't need to tell you how great that match was. Don't even need to tell you who was in it. And yes, they went outside the cage, but somehow it still fit. Oh, sorry, something went off my computer there. It still fit the story in the context of what was going on. And the way they left the cage was, it was logical because Shawn had injured a cameraman. And you'd be willing to think that Shawn is so sneaky that he had that plan to try to escape the Undertaker because that was what he was trying to do. They just walked outside the cage for the sake of it. When they get back in, they fight to get out of it. They're just completely hanging out the cage. Again, it's not like Brett and Owen where there was, again, a good story behind it, and a lot of things they did made sense. There was a battle to escape. Really, there's just not much of a battle happening here. Then, how many fake stings there were, I don't even watched this not long ago. I was losing focus. I mean, again, don't get me wrong. I love both these guys. I do. I have a Hogan shirt. Piper was amazing. Love Piper. But I didn't care for this at all. Did not care whatsoever. So yeah, the fake stings. You had Macho. Okay, so the thing that I remember the most about this match, I think a lot of people do, is Macho Man's interference. Some say there's always those conspiracy theorists with Hogan that he was supposed to catch him and back her at the last second. And it kind of looks like that if you watch it. Macho hurts his leg. That was ugly. I'm surprised Macho's injuries, problems, which again, there were noted knee issues after that, and pretty much started here, but I'm surprised his knee didn't pop out right there, that he didn't have a Jim Cornette style knee injury. God damn! Popped out my knees as Bubba failed to catch me. Motherfucker. Anyway. I had to work that in on a podcast sometime. But anyway, yeah, Piper gets handcuffed. I don't know. I just remember random stuff about this match. Even watching it again not long ago, I just only remember random stuff. WCW again trying to hype this up as the greatest cage match of all time. And I remember looking at my dad saying, "This sucks." And my dad says to me, he looks at me and goes, like, "How the mighty have fallen." Gets up and walks out. Because again, I mentioned Macho being his guy. Because again, if you're a WWF in the WWF in the '80s, those were one of my dad's guys. Hogan and Piper were his guys. I think he was honestly. I think this is one of the. Again, he was already done watching wrestling at this point for the most part, and would just pop in here and there. But I think seeing this turned him off even further than he already was. I honestly think that. I think he hated having to watch these two guys who he enjoyed watching for years in this sort of environment. Oh, Piper won, by the way. Yeah, it was not title, so you know. I mean, the match happened. They wanted the rubber match. Obviously, they're not going to take the title off of Hogan because of the whole thing with Sting coming up. Unless he did like the Luger change thing again, where Piper wins it for like a day or a week or whatever, and then loses it back. Which, like, sure, I guess they could have done, but that'd just be a little overkill at that point because the Luger win just happened again, just under 3 months before this. So yeah. As a whole, I thought the show was amazing. Even the matches, like, again, the throwaway matches, like the Mongo Alex Ray match, it was short. At least it progressed some with Mongo and Goldberg. The Jacqueline Disco match was Even the Hall Luger match had its moments and still, again, progressed things leading to Starrcade. Again, a lot of this stuff was progressing towards Starrcade, which a lot of Halloween Havocs had a way of doing, and that's fine. So overall, I walked away from the show despite that main event happy. So I remember I stayed up another couple hours that night. I remember I sometimes stayed up later than my parents because they still both had to work in the morning. I remember the school's on strike. I stayed up. And I remember I called my buddy John because he had a phone in his room. He said his mom slept like slept through the night, never waking up. She was a very deep sleeper, so I could always call him late, even though I never really did. But or usually, so I called him and he's like, "Hey, who won?" I told him about the show, and he was laughing at my description of the cage match. He thought it was funny. Age in the cage, brother. No, I didn't say that at the time. That term came later, but yeah. And no, I mean the whole age in the cage thing is I mean, you think about it, they were not much older than AJ Styles is now. So, and AJ Styles is one of the best. Jeff Hardy may not be what we remember him as, but still has his moments where he can go, and he's 43. So, I just think that I guess they just looked old out there. I don't know. AJ actually Jeff's starting to look a little worn, but AJ doesn't. When he wears the makeup, he doesn't. And AJ doesn't really look old at all. So, and I guess just the way the match was flowing made it look slow. But anyway, so that was it. And overall, I liked it. And I told John how he had to get his hands on the Eddie Guerrero Rey Mysterio match. So again, even watching this show, not again recently, I thought it was still one of the best shows WCW had done. So there you go. So the next day, so this is a little bonus. Then keep in mind, my dad had just told me the rumors of Bret Hart leaving for WCW. Bret Hart had a real problem. He stated this on and off the record on TSN about a current angle he had going on with the Nation of Domination. He and the Hart Foundation did, where they were portrayed to be racist. They were accused of spray painting racial slurs in the Nation's locker room on the Raw that actually was the week before Halloween Havoc. So even me, again, me being taught by my parents not to judge on race, I never did. I've had many friends and even girlfriends of different ethnicities. It made me feel uncomfortable too. And not a lot of wrestling storylines made me feel uncomfortable at this point, ever, really. So Bret had a problem with it. And he said this on the talk show Off the Record on TSN, which had only debuted just recently at this point. Again, but it was red hot. It was taken off. Everybody was talking about this show. And the wrestling episodes, apparently from what I read, always drew high numbers for TSN. WWF was always a winner on TSN. Make no mistake about it. Even WCW still had its audience, too. Even though WWF was, Canada was WWF country. Let's face facts. So, and what Raw the next night? They had the opening segment where, again, the racial tones of the storyline at a sky high. In my head, I think a lot of people thought this too. People still mention this today that obviously we thought the payoff was going to be DX had framed the Hart Foundation because, again, it was leading to Bret and Shawn at the Survivor Series. Oh, yes, this is where I'm leading. So I remember watching this segment that night. And you can clearly see Bret's mouth. This is stupid during this segment. It doesn't come out audibly on camera, mind you, but you read his lips, it's pretty clear. Sean making KKK references, calling Brett the Grand Wizard. No, not Ernie Roth. Much worse Grand Wizard. Ernie Roth was only bad in a character standpoint, and definitely not evil in a racial standpoint at all. But anyway, so I digress. And even I thought this was stupid. And yeah, I didn't like this. I didn't like this story. I didn't like it. So it was very uncomfortable. I don't know. I guess I hated my favorite wrestler being portrayed as a racist. It's just like, I don't know, maybe as the fan in me thought that, but over as a person, I just was really kind of about this storyline. So, but that's not what I remember the most about this show even. No. What I remember the most is Jim Cornette cutting a scathing promo on the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. YouTube this, folks. It's on there. In the way Cornette presented, because Cornette, whether you like him or not, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, and I disagree with a lot of what he says sometimes, but I do agree with what he says sometimes. He says these things with such conviction that you're going to listen, especially back then. Cornette was a prominent personality still in wrestling at that point, even though he hadn't been on, like he was doing commentary on and off at this point, but he hadn't really been playing a manager on TV for the better part of a year. So, but still though, people had a general idea that Jim Cornette was a big deal. And the way, just his conviction, his passion about how Hogan and Piper's egos were pretty much why this match was put together, and why he feels that guys like The Undertaker and Steve Austin and whatnot, Ric Flair, should be considered, you know, icons. I could be leaving out some names. I could have even been adding some. I don't know. It's been a little while since I watched the promo, but I know it's on YouTube still. So, yeah, just like, you know what? He's right. He's right. And I think I soured. This is where I really started souring on Hogan a bit. I didn't sour on Hogan for good after this. Obviously, it's, you know, he does some things he would do after this I enjoyed. But at the same time, I figure he had a point. I'm like, yeah, Hell in a Cell was the greatest. Like, they call it the greatest cage match of all time. It was only the greatest outside Hell in a Cell recently. And the greatest in the last couple of weeks since Hell in a Cell. God damn, Hell in a Cell is better, motherfucker. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But yeah, that's pretty much the gist of what he said. Cut up the NWO real good. Even though WWE was doing better, WWF doing better was just around the corner. Pretty much. So, of course, 2 weeks after this show, less than 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks, Survivor Series kind of Brett and Sean. And that's going to lead us to next week, folks. That's right, next week's episode. The Montreal Screwjob. 2-part episode. In the next week, the next couple weeks, actually, I will be interviewing local Ontario indie wrestlers, fans, and whoever else wants to talk about it, about what their thoughts on the Montreal Screwjob was, and if they were watching at the time. So yes, that's something to look forward to next week. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot wait to cover that. Pivotal time as a fan. So once again, thank you all for listening. If you want to follow me on social media, BillChase33, both on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Facebook, just simply Bill Chase. Want to add me and talk wrestling? By all means, go ahead. So that's going to do it for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Until next week, this is Bill Chase, quoting my fellow native Hamiltonian, the late great Billy Red Lyons, when I tell y'all, don't you dare miss it. Thank you for listening to Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. If you'd like to make a contribution to the show, just remember, it's always better to be a smartass than a dumbass.